Hello everybody, welcome back to my home here in East Tennessee. It's November and a lot of my Tolumnias are starting to spike. As you see, my beautiful Tolumnia Jairak Flyer Sahara has already bloomed. She's always the first one to bloom out for me every year. I've had this plant for 3 years. She's one of the very first ones that I ever bought. So I have 3 years experience growing Tolumnias now, and I feel like I've kind of found my footing with them. I've learned what works and what does not work for me, and I thought I would just pass on that knowledge to you all today, hoping that it will help you grow your Tolumnias. These are awesome orchids to grow. I have really enjoyed them. So I'm going to give a care tutorial and just let you all know what I've learned over the past 3 years about these gorgeous plants. Okay, so lots of spikes here. We have a spike here on Tolumnia J.Firm, Red Devil, and I've got 3 spikes on the yellow one, J.Firm Yellow. This long spike and these 2 shorter spikes. Okay, so let me tell you all why I like to grow these in my house instead of in my sunroom. My sunroom gets a little bit cooler in the winter than it does here in my house because of all the glass that surrounds that room, and it also gets hotter in the summer. So what I like to do is keep them between 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that's 21 to 27 Celsius. That's their sweet spot. These grow around the equator. They grow in the Caribbean on twigs. And so they have this little, I don't know, they do better at a specific temperature. My sunroom at night can get down to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. They don't really like that. That's not really too cold, but they like the warmer, more constant temperatures that I have here in my house. So 70 to 80 degrees is just where they do the best. Also, in the summertime, I noticed they were drying out too much in my sunroom. It can get very warm back there in the sunroom in the summer. And they were just not doing very well in the temps, in the higher temps back there. So I figured out that is a really good temperature range for my Tolumnias. And also, I'm going to put some pictures to the side of the screen of other Tolumnias that I have that have bloomed. I have a lot of pictures of my Tolumnias. I take pictures all the time. I started putting pictures on my Thanksgiving cactus videos when there's nothing much going on with them. You know, it just looked like a green forest kind of. And so many of you have enjoyed that. So I'll be adding those pictures so that these aren't the only blooms that you all get to see. But in about a month, I'm going to be able to do a video with just Tolumnia blooms. But I will add that this time. And another thing to keep in mind is I grow the Tolumnia hybrids. I don't grow the species. I believe that the species are a little bit more finicky. And with me, I am really after a lot of color with these. I mean, look at the color of this. It's just incredible. They're also not as finicky. These are easier to grow than the species would be. So, okay, my media choice for these, therefore, is I grow these in New Zealand spag moss, Best Grow brand, and I top it with bark, with orchiata bark. That way I don't get any algae growing in my pots that can turn into cyanobacteria. I don't really like algae growing in my pots at all. So that holds the algae down. I grow them in darker pots. As you see, this is not a dark pot, but I cover it with a darker pot. So that helps. So spag moss topped with bark is what I grow all of my Tolumnias in. And I'm going to show you how I use the bark and the moss. Okay, this is J.Firm Big Bang. I've had this for 2.5 years. It's just huge. It's in a 5-inch pot. So this is a big pot for this orchid. So I go ahead and put some bark in with this New Zealand spag moss. I'd say it's probably about a 30% bark to 70% moss, just to keep things light and airy so that the bark won't get heavy. Okay, and this is a 1-year plant. I've had this for a year. This is Ladybug. Can you see the big, huge difference in these two? Okay, this might just be a smaller cultivar as well, but this one is just a year old. It's in a 2-inch pot, and it's in all sphagnum moss. I can get by with a small pot full of sphagnum moss. A larger pot I need to start putting a little bit of bark into. So that's how I do it here in East Tennessee. This just kind of keeps everything from getting too wet. I think that this would stay too wet for too long in just all New Zealand spag moss. And I water these when the media gets dry, however long that is. Sometimes I go a week, sometimes I go 10 or 11 days. It just depends on if my heating system's cutting on or if my air conditioning's cutting on, but I check to make sure that the medium is dry. If you leave them dry for too long, though, they'll start to pucker. So I don't let them dry out for too long, but just as soon as the pot dries, that's when I re-water. But let me give you a heads up on the smaller Tolumnias. Let's say you just got a Tolumnia. It's tiny. It barely has any roots. What I did, I got 3 of those that were just extremely tiny, very few roots. I put them in very small pots and put them on wicks. It worked beautifully until they got larger and I could put them in larger pots, and then I started watering them like I do the others. But when they're in smaller pots, you have to check these a little bit more often than these great big pots like over here. So with this one, I had this one in on the wicking method for about a year. I just took it off, as a matter of fact. It's good to go now, but it was about half this size when I first got it. And some of them, when you first get them, they are very small. So, like, really offering them constant moisture is the way to go when they're that small and tiny and they don't have many roots, because they'll just dry up. I lost one that way. I just didn't water it enough. The roots weren't mature enough, and I just watched it wrinkle up and just, that was it for that little Tolumnia. So the wicking method for the little tiny ones, the ones that you first get, they're just little seedlings. If they're very, very small, the wicking method will definitely work. That's how I pulled, let me think, 3 of mine through, let's say, childhood, the first year that I had them. And it did work. It worked very well. And the next question, how do I fertilize these? I use the Tesula MSU fertilizer, and I use it at about 1/4 strength. That's about 200 parts per million every other time that I water. Now, if you've got a new one and it doesn't have many roots, I would use less than that, like a tiny little bit, because if there's no roots, no sense in really fertilizing them until they get a root system. But I do this, I use this 2 or 3 times a month. It just depends on how much they're growing. If anything starts turning yellow on them, then instead of doing it every other time, I'll do it 3 times in a row when I water it, and then water it with RO the next time, with just plain water the next time. So about 180 to 200 parts per million, that's plenty. As you see, mine have done very, very well. I'm probably going to start increasing the amounts. With my larger ones, I can probably go up to 250 parts per million on those, because they're huge. But this has served me very well. They've grown really well with that regimen. And here's the rest of my Tolumnias. You can see some spikes down here. There's one on Koromo. There's one on Barbie. There's one on Pink Lady, one of my favorites. They've all done really well. Now, I have learned some things over the past 3 years, which means I've made some mistakes. That's usually how I learn really, really quickly about what to do and what not to do. This is a Phalaenopsis that I have here in the center. It thinks it's a Tolumnia, I do believe. It loves this window. It loves being around the Tolumnias, and every time I move it, it pouts and tells me it doesn't like to be moved. So that's why it's there. That's its home. But what I've learned is the new ones that I buy, I repot those in 1 year when I see new growth. They are very much like Cattleyas in that regard. You don't want to repot them until you see new growth. I water them more often when they're blooming. I do that with my Cattleyas as well. You can kind of see a pattern here. They do dry out quicker when they're blooming. And on the subject of blooming, I don't let them bloom for months on end. These things will bloom for a long time if you let them. I have learned that's not the way to go. It stresses them out and they start losing roots. So as soon as these start to fade, I'm going to cut the spike off. I've had some, well, I'll show you which ones I'm talking about. Okay, this one is red spread, and back there with the spike, you see Koromo. Do you see how part of these plants look dried out? These were in bloom, I don't know, 2 or 3 months. And after they quit blooming, they just were thirsty. They were tired. So I'm not going to do that again. I learned my lesson because they're almost like a Phalaenopsis. You know how a phal will bloom itself out of existence if you let it just continue to bloom. These I'm not going to let just stay in constant bloom all the time. I've actually lost part of this plant because it had 2 spikes and it was in bloom a long time. So I won't do that again. That's how we learn things. Another thing I've learned is these grow fast. You know how sometimes they just sit there and they look like they're not doing anything? Well, pretty soon you're going to have something like this. To the right is the little ladybug that I showed you that I've had for 1 year. This is Carnival. I've had this one for 3 years. Note the difference. They turn into little bushes before you can turn around. So keep that in mind when you're buying them, because my shelves just filled up with Tolumias really quick, which is really cool. That's what I wanted them to do. But I was really surprised just at the amount they grew and how fast they grow once they start going. And another little note about repotting. What I do is I repot when I see new growth and roots starting, just exactly like I do with my cats. They establish quickly that way. You don't break any roots when they're first starting to show from the base. So that's what I do, no matter what time of year that might be. It's usually in the summer for me, and then they gear up to bloom in the winter. But when I see those new roots starting to form, that's a really, really good time to repot if you need to. And if you buy a plant with very few roots, or you damage them getting them out of their nursery pots, they can take a long time to recover. Just try to save as many roots as you can when you're repotting them for the first time, when they come in those little tiny 1-inch plastic pots. Sometimes if the root system is damaged too much, it just won't start going again. Your best bet would be to place it on a wick to give it constant moisture, like I mentioned before, but try to get them with the best root system that you possibly can. And another weak point about these plants is if you get water in between the leaf axis, that is going to cause rotting. I have one that somehow it got water in the crown of one of these fans, and the fan just rotted. So what I do is I water around the pot. This one likes to be bottom watered. I just put it in a little pan of water and let it soak up what it needs. So either bottom water them or just make sure to water around the sides of the pot, not like, don't water here, water around. If you get any moisture in between the leaves or whatever, take a paper towel and make sure you clean it out, because you just don't want rot setting in. That's a really bad way. Well, it will cause your growth to rot. I'll show you the one that I'm talking about. I've had it happen to me. And the one I actually had a fan to rot on was Sahara. I was going to have 2 spikes on this plant this time. I was so excited. But do you see right here where I have applied cinnamon? This was a growth that rotted because obviously I got water in the fan. And yeah, that's what happened. Of course, I still got beautiful blooms on the other growth, but I wished I'd had the second growth. I'd have 2 spikes of flowers to show you. But yeah, cinnamon. If you have a part of your plant that rots, seal it with cinnamon. That's my advice to you, but just make sure you're watering carefully, because these things, they don't like having water in between their fans. But I still got this bloom and I'm so glad. And several of you have asked me about my LED lights. I use the halo lights with these, and the shelves are about 15 inches apart. So you can see about how close the plants are to the lights. And the ones in the kitchen, there's 15 inches between the countertop and the top of the LED light. So it's about 15 inches from the surface where they're sitting here on the shelves or on the countertop. So that, I'm kind of trying to give you a visual here, because sometimes when you can see it, it's better than when you explain it. These also get some western sunlight. I don't keep this window open because I think that western sunlight along with the LED lights would be a little bit too much, but they really do like the light. So I keep the shades here about halfway down. This, you can see, I kind of have some sunlight coming in and some of it's filtered. So that's how much light they get in a day, which is quite a bit. And I leave the LED lights on 12 hours all year long. And I think I've told you all everything that I know so far about Tolumnias. I hope that this has been helpful to you all. And I want to thank everybody for watching. Thanks to all of my subscribers. Thanks to my members. I appreciate you all so very much. Thanks to all of you who leave comments and who like my videos and hype my videos. You all are my orchid family, and I really do appreciate you more than you know. So before I end the video, I'd love to say the blessing over you, your families, and your plants. May the Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. You all make it a great day. We'll talk to you next time.